Welcome back to another episode of Barbecue and Bottles, and today we're going to be doing a steak experiment where we're comparing what it's like to season your cutting board and dress your cutting board versus just seasoning or dressing your actual steak. We'll do a side-by-side experiment using these two beautiful ribeyes, and we'll see which one we like the best. So this video is inspired by a super popular steak video, I'm sure you've seen it out there, by Ragusea, where he tells you why he prefers to actually dress his cutting board as opposed to seasoning his steak. And I gotta tell you, I'm a little skeptical, so I thought what better way to try and put this to the test through one of these steak experiments. And so these are prime steaks. These are really well marbled, high fat content here. We've got two ribeyes. And what we're gonna do is one of them, we're just gonna salt an hour before we put them on the grill. And the other steak, we're gonna follow Adam's method. And then we'll do a little comparison at the end. And for salt, I'm just using a really fine kosher salt for this. I'm not using a Fleur De Sel, which is the finishing salt that Adam uses. So I'll get that patted in, flip it over, and we'll salt the other side of the steak here as well. All right, pat that in. Now we'll let these rest for about an hour before we get them out on the grill. So now while our steaks are resting, we're just gonna prepare some of the compound butter that we're gonna baste the steaks with on the grill. Okay, so we've got some unsalted butter here. So we're just gonna go in, use as much of this as you like. Now to that, we're gonna take some garlic. Now for some rosemary sprigs. All we're gonna do is take the leaves off of the rosemary like this, and then we'll just finely chop our rosemary. Perfect, now that's the texture that we're looking for right there. So I'll just use our knife, get that in. Now we're gonna go in with some chives, cut the ends off. All right, now the last step is just adding a little bit of freshly ground black pepper. So I'll just do that over the top. So now just using a fork, you're gonna wanna press all of that down in here and mix it together. So just getting your fork down in there. Oh, that smells incredible. So now to get the grill ready. Now we'll just give this 10 minutes for the coals to completely warm up here. Now the charcoal's fully lit, we're just gonna get this set up for our reverse sear. Perfect. So if we're aiming for low and slow, we want our vents just to be cracked slightly here and the one on the bottom. So we've got the grill up to 225. So now we're gonna put them both on the grill. So this one, Adam's steak, this one, our steak. Now we're just gonna get a temp probe into the center of the steak. Now we're gonna let these steaks go until we hit an internal temp of 115 degrees Fahrenheit. Now as we're cruising along here at 225, we're just gonna move our compound butter into the actual grill and we're gonna let this melt. Now this is what we're gonna baste our steak with, but of course with Adam's, we'll do the board dressing just so we can compare. This butter is starting to melt that we've had on the grill. So we're just gonna baste our steak with it like this. And we're already getting some of the herbs, the rosemary, the chives, the garlic that we used in here. We're getting that to actually cook a little bit through this process. And I think that's gonna make the intensity of those flavors mellow out a little bit. And it's just gonna make for a more well-rounded flavor to the steak. Now we're at 100 degrees internal, so we're just gonna flip this steak over. And then we're gonna butter baste the other side. So both steaks have hit an internal temp of 115 here now. Now I'll get these steaks off and resting and prep this grill for the final sear. Now before we sear off those steaks, we've got to prep Adam's board here. So we're gonna again take rosemary, pull the leaves off of one sprig, and then we will chop this very finely. All right, now we'll get our chives out. Now we're gonna microplane a clove of garlic over the top. And now we're gonna mix this together and then go in with some butter. And now some freshly ground black pepper. And then just a little pinch of salt. This isn't the main seasoning, this is just a light seasoning of salt. We'll add our Fleur De Sel later, like Adam did. But now we've got our board dressed. Now it's just waiting for a steak, so let's get back out there and finish searing off those ribeyes. Now we've got the coals here ripping hot. We've got the cast iron insert here. So now we'll get the steaks on the grill. Now this won't take very long. We're just looking to get to an internal temp of about 128 or 130, which will be a nice medium rare. And while these are searing away, we're just gonna keep basting this steak and making sure that all that garlic, rosemary, and chive herb mixture here in our butter actually gets to cook away in the grill. So we're just gonna flip these over. Really nice char forming here. And again, we'll go back in and baste this one a little more. All right, these guys have hit their internal temps of 128. So now we're gonna take them off and get them inside. So now we're gonna transfer Adam's steak onto our cutting board with the dressing. And we're just gonna let that melt, and all of the juices are supposed to reabsorb back into the steak. Ours, we're just gonna let it sit here, and we'll let this sit for about 10 minutes before we slice into this one. So we're just trying to get the butter to melt here on Adam's dressed board. So the heat of the steak is supposed to cook the garlic a little bit, as well as just mute the flavor profile of the rosemary a little bit. So we'll see if that works here. Now the next step in Adam's cook is just slicing the steak. So we're gonna come along and carve up the steak. Now this is virtually a minute or two after having put it on the board. And then we're gonna carve this into small pieces, just like that. And then we're gonna mix. So we mix all of these pieces up in the juice that's on the actual cutting board itself, and we'll let that finish resting. Now the theory behind the board dressing method is that when you grill a steak, it's like squeezing a sponge, and you squeeze all the juice out of the steak while you're grilling it. But then also when you release a sponge, the sponge has an ability to reabsorb all the moisture. And so letting the steak sit here on the board in its own juices is equivalent to that sponge reabsorbing all those juices. So we're gonna see at the end here whether we reabsorb all this juice that's been coming out of the steak, and then we're gonna do our taste test. All right, it's been 10 minutes, so we're gonna carve into our steak here as well. Then we'll start with the taste test. Okay, we're gonna take a piece from the middle. Just look at that beautiful medium rare. That's why I love the reverse sear method. So we're gonna get a little piece here with the fat cap. Oh, it's still nice and hot to the touch. We're gonna give it a taste test. That steak is incredibly juicy, really well seasoned, but you can certainly taste the rosemary and garlic on that. Absolutely one of my favorite ways to grill a steak. So now we're just gonna go in with a little bit of Fleur De Sel. So this is the finishing salt. These are large chunks of salt. When you look at these salt crystals up close, it almost looks like they're little prisms. It's a really, really high quality salt. Okay, so I'm gonna pick out a piece here that's got a bit of a fat cap, all the herbs on it, nicely salted, and we'll see how the taste test goes. So that's a great piece of steak, I'm not gonna lie, but a couple of observations here. This steak, because it's been resting already pre-cut up, it's had 10 minutes for the heat to just work its way out of the steak. So when you bite into it, you definitely notice a temperature difference. Now Adam suggests warming your plate and going through all that trouble to reheat your steak, but that's not all that convenient for me. And that is a definite drawback to this method from my perspective. Second thing that you really notice is just the sharpness of the rosemary and the garlic. I'm not sure that the 10 minutes of the steak actually resting on it was enough to just round out those flavor profiles. They're really forward, they're really prominent, and those are just bold flavors that I think dominate this steak. Lastly, I'm gonna say seasoning it at the end here, and if you look, just look at this piece of steak. It's got a giant salt crystal on it, and I just find when you season your steak at the end before serving, you end up in a scenario where your steak isn't evenly seasoned. And it's very easy to have one piece that's totally unsalted or lower on the salt spectrum, and then you can have another that's really heavily salted. And just salting an hour before you actually put it on the grill, in my mind, makes for a much more even seasoning profile on your steak. But again, I'm not gonna complain. This steak was awesome. I'm glad we did this experiment, but I am gonna give the winner to the one where you actually season your steak while it's on the grill. So if you like this video, give us a like below, consider subscribing to the channel. And Adam, you ever wanna come over for a steak? Just let us know. Thanks for tuning in.